Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Engage, Empower, Excel, Transforming Performance in the New Era of Work, presented by Human Resources Today and sponsored by Bonusly. I'm Tori, the webinar coordinator of Human Resources Today, and I'm excited to bring you this fresh session with strategies to drive exceptional results and create a workplace where employees feel valued and motivated. I'm really looking forward to speaking with Radhika Samit, Adri Glover, and David Brown, and what I'm sure will be an engaging conversation. Just so you know, this webinar is Sherman HRCI approved. All attendees that stay for at least 50 minutes, that's 50, will receive an email with the activity IDs within 48 hours. Please note that in order to receive the activity IDs, you must be present during the live webinar. This information cannot be provided to those who view the webinar recording. As mentioned, we will be recording this webinar in case you need to leave early. If you happen to miss any part of today's session, you can go to the registration page to view the recording. We're going to be sending that link to you in the chat right now. Up next, we'd like to encourage you all to participate in the poll on your screen. As you submit your responses, I want to thank Bonusly for sponsoring this series and helping us to make this happen. Bonusly builds high-performing cultures by delivering an employee recognition and feedback solution that amplifies wins, connects teams, and shares insights. The results? Employees love where they work, are engaged, and deliver business results that drive your company forward. Managers play a critical role in all of this too. They are on the company front lines after all, supporting, coaching, and guiding their employees. With Bonusly, managers receive exclusive real-time feedback on how their teams are connecting and collaborating. They can leverage this data to cultivate a vibrant, effective team culture. Said another way, empowering managers with data empowers high performance. Bonusly believes that employees are key to business success, and effective feedback, both positive and constructive, enables strong performance. This is essential to drive high-performing cultures. So thanks again, Bonusly. Up next, let's get some technical things out of the way. Please don't hesitate to ask questions during today's event. You can do so by submitting your questions into the Q&A panel found in the bottom bar of this webinar window. Great questions make for a great webinar, so don't forget to stick around for our Q&A session near the end of the hour to get even more fresh insight from our panelists. The chat is also available for open discussion, but please know we will be using the Q&A panel for your specific questions. My wonderful colleague Tara will be fielding your questions today, and she'll be happy to answer anything technical you might have. So feel free to pull the Q&A panel or the chat, say hello, and let her know where you're joining us from. Closed captioning is also available for this webinar. To enable this feature, select the More button in the bottom bar of the webinar window and select the Show Captions option. Lastly, if you have any audio issues during today's presentation, you may choose to dial in by phone. The dial-in information can be found in your webinar confirmation email from Zoom. This information is also available on the screen, and Tara can relay it to you at any point if you need it. Up next, again, today I'm really excited to hear from our three amazing panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to David to start off the introductions.
Great. Thank you so much, Tori, and hello, everyone from Human Resources Today. I think it's been about a month now that we've been with you all, and so we are just really excited to be back. I see a lot of you are dropping in the chat where you're calling from. I love that. My name's David. I am calling from Jacksonville, Florida. And if this is your first webinar with Bonusly, we love to do our webinars a bit different than the typical one. We do it, Q&A style. We have a handful of questions that I'll be asking Adrian Radhika their thoughts on. But as we discuss, we love our webinars to be engaging. So please, if you have any thoughts, anything that resonates with you, any ideas that you may do at your company that you want to share with everyone, please drop them in the chat. We love for it to be engaging throughout the entire time. But like Tori mentioned, we will save some time at the end for a Q&A. So use that Q&A box if anything pops up throughout the conversation. But before we get into the first question, I would love to introduce our two speakers. And so we'll start with you, Adri, and then go to you, Radhika. But would love for you just to share with everyone where you're calling from, what your role is here at Bonusly, and then in honor of, Sunday being the first official day of autumn, just share with everyone what your favorite thing about fall is.
My pleasure, David. Thank you so much for the warm intro. And thank you, Tori and Human Resources today for having us. My name is Adri Glover. I'm the head of people operations here at Bonusly. I am originally from New York City, but I'm calling from Weehawken, New Jersey today. And my favorite thing about fall is honestly apple picking and all the wonderful autumn festivals they have going on. I have a 2-year-old daughter. We took her apple picking 2 weeks ago, and I just think everything about watching the leaves change, just enjoying the holiday season being kicked off, and everything pumpkin spice is lovely. So, with that being said, I'd love to turn over to Radhika and give a warm intro to her as well.
Thank you, Adri. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone, for having us here and listening to us and joining us. I really appreciate it. I'm Radhika. Anyone who has ever seen my LinkedIn profile will know that I'm extremely passionate about all things people. So I'm living my dream right now in terms of this role, and figuring out what is the next world of work going to look like. So very super excited to be here for that. As far as fall is concerned, I come from India, which is a very hot place most of the time. So I think fall weather is what really makes me most happy. I don't like it when it goes all the way to winter, and I don't like it when it goes all the way hot in summer. So I'm definitely the fall temperature girl. So really, really excited for fall and looking forward to enjoying the colors.
I love it. I am in Florida, so we rarely get, fall leaves or anything, but I just love when the temperature is not 100% humidity and in the hundreds. So, really looking forward to some cooler weather here soon. The last thing I will say before we jump into the first question is in the chat, if you look at the little top there where it says who you're messaging, sometimes it auto populates it to just host and panelist. So be sure you flip it to everyone. We want everyone to hear all of your comments, see what you're saying. So just be sure to do that as we go through this webinar. And with that, we will jump into the first question. And so the new era of work. We've heard a lot about this. We've heard people speak about it definitely since the pandemic, but even so before then. But honestly, we all know that the world of work has changed drastically over the last few years. And so let's just set the stage. And so I'll pass it to you, Adrian Radica. But what is the new era of work?
Yeah, David, thanks for kicking us off here. I think that in a single sentence, today's era of work is really defined by employees needing and wanting workplace flexibility, but also wanting to do great work, progress in their careers, and feel connected. You mentioned just at the beginning this aspect of the pandemic, right? And I think that there's some out there that might be thinking, why are we still talking about the pandemic? It's 4 years ago. But I definitely see today's era of work being a ripple effect, but from what originally came out of COVID, that's very much affected not only how we started this aspect of remote work, but also what employees need and are requiring today. As a whole, the pandemic was a major transformation for humanity. It gave us a sense of really thinking about what matters. And I think that employees not only discovered what mattered to them in their personal lives, but that remote work was actually possible. And as we moved away from the offices, there was also a sense of, culture, engagement, day-to-day ways of working that changed drastically. That is very much defining where we're at today, knowing that many teams are hybrid or operating remotely, even on this call as we're speaking. I think the second really big driving factor of today's era of work is this shift in generational mix that we're seeing in the workplace today. And that's something that can't be ignored. Employees not only want that workplace flexibility, but Gen Z is actually making up about 27% of the workforce by 2025, and that will continue to grow. This generation, looking at Harvard Business Review, really wants an increased aspect of feeling connected. They are growing up in the age of the internet and technology. They're very much used to having an open access environment and a need to know one. And most importantly, their expectations are really focused on real-time feedback, knowing how they're doing against their goals, really getting that immediate access and not waiting, for things like traditional performance reviews once a year, which I know we'll continue to talk about as a theme throughout today's conversation. But it's something really meaningful in terms of how we're showing up to work, how that's affecting other generations, how we work together, but also balancing this aspect of remote work that maybe started 4 years ago, maybe even prior to the pandemic for some on this call. But generally really affecting not only how we show up to work, but how we can perform at our best and really enable that through people managers, leadership, and HR. And I think that what's really unique about this era of work is while we want that remote flexibility, there's also an aspect of working remotely, having real connections to feeling disengagement, feeling isolated. So it's something that we'll continue to talk about as we navigate those two driving forces, as well as what this means for people managers. And I'll turn over to Radhika in a moment. I'd love her thoughts on this as well. But as we think about people managers also being employees, and David, maybe if we go to the next slide for just a moment, we'll see that managers are really struggling today. This is not only about managing remote teams and needs of Gen Z, but it's also about managers being employees too, right? And not having the access at their fingertips to being in the seat of only being people managers. This goes to increased responsibilities, workloads, also the aspect of you could say focus too much on work than to spend time investing in our people. But I would also say that for people managers, this sense of your employees feeling disconnected, seeing that leadership, HR is having to make very difficult decisions the past 2 years, whether it's through restructures, layoffs, et cetera, has compounded aspects of building trust in today's era of work. So people managers being on the front lines, really motivating their people, building those relationships, also in the sense of remote work where things need to be scheduled, right? We set up Zoom calls. We don't really have that asynchronous opportunity to connect the way we once did in an office, is all something that's really being heavily discussed. And I think a crucial part as we engage in today's conversation and look at today's landscape and the needs of our people. With that being said, Radhika, I'd love to turn to you to get your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, and I'm watching the chat and I'm just looking at the number of people who are remote or hybrid, and I'm curious, there are some who are 100% on-site. So I'm actually curious to know how they feel about that. Is it like something they have to do, or is it something that they welcome doing? But really speaking from a leadership standpoint, this whole ask of wanting people to come back to work has also been about the fact that there is just this struggle to try to figure out how to make people productive when they're remote, right? So it's about acknowledging that the way of work has actually changed. And then the big question that comes up is, do you force people on site because it feels familiar and that's what's going to drive productivity, or do you actually find new solutions? And what we're going to talk about a lot today is about how you find new solutions for this issue that has arisen. So leadership is not wrong, because there is a struggle and it's getting reflected in all of the company performances that we are seeing. Like there is this feeling that the market is not doing well, but a lot of that also has to do with this new change that's occurred. So we have to think about it. So that's basically, I think, what we're going to talk about in this session. So hopefully it's going to be meaningful. But I am curious, anyone who said on-site, would love to know whether it's voluntarily, happily on-site or have to be on-site. If you could just type that as well. Back to you, David.
Yeah, I feel like almost every week now it's a big news story of a new big company mandating everyone to return to office. And I really agree with what you said, Radhika. Definitely, is it out of that's what we're comfortable or used to? But, some people just don't have the time even to really just explore these new solutions that may work with remote work. And so really excited about all that you all have to share. And just to share with everyone as well, we do at Bonusly work fully remote. And so I'm really excited for Radhika and Adri to share some of their thoughts on this. But we'll start with you, Radhika, with this next question. But what are companies doing wrong today in terms of this new era of work?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think first and foremost, what's going wrong is that people are trying to retrofit the same old ways that they used to do things into the new way of doing things. But it's a little bit even more complicated than that. And I think, David, if you go to the next slide, I just want to talk about it in the context of like cultivating high performing cultures, which is essentially what companies want, right? We all come together in a job in order to do something and make something happen, all of which depends on how we perform and whether we are achieving those outcomes or not. What has really transpired right now, which we have to keep in mind with so many people being, remote or hybrid, or let me just take it one step further. It's not even that you have to be remote or hybrid. You could be on-site. But the reality is that with scale occurring, there are always going to be people who are in some other location. So you may be going to offices, but it's not like every single person is working in the same office. And so when you have that situation, the tools that were very powerful in starting us on track to be able to work in this way, which are like Zoom or Teams or Meets or whichever form of communication you use, those were very effective. But the problem is that every single interaction actually became a structured conversation because it always has an agenda. It's always set up with a topic. It's always time bound. Think of that. That is a pretty big change. And if you really think about what we miss when we went to offices, we actually saw there was a lot of organic asynchronous communication that was naturally occurring, right? You got a lot of your information and things just by existing. Like it was almost osmosis that you were sitting there and, things that were being said around you were kind of being absorbed. So that really does make a difference. And I'm going to also just I'm going to tell a little story because I think that it was a very it was a moment that really highlighted something for me. And I was conducting a sales interview for our company, and I had the opportunity to interview this candidate who was extremely intelligent, very smart, high performer in a very high performing company. So it was almost like this picture perfect scenario. And I asked her, I said, so why are you looking for a position? In another time, this person would not have been a candidate that would have been looking for a position. And she said, well, the thing is that I sit in my room and I'm working and I'm basically not, because I'm in sales, I'm very rarely able to understand what else is happening in the company. There is no way for me to know that. My interaction with the team happens sometimes, maybe there is a team meeting, but my interaction with the manager once a week is for 30 minutes. And I have a lot of anxiety going into that conversation because I actually don't know what the topic is going to be. And many times it's just that my manager is in a bad mood or has experienced something and he's kind of venting to me because he has a team of 9 people, of which many are new. And that's why I feel like I don't think that they're interested in my growth. And I realized a few things. So while employees want the flexibility of remote working, they also want the relationship and they want to perform and they actually want to do good work. That is not the problem. The problem is that if companies are not understanding the current situation and finding ways to build a substitute for that in-office experience that used to exist and recognize that there is an asynchronous communication which is required, you're both putting the employee and the manager in a really bad spot. How does the manager even know that, right? So that's one thing that companies are, I think, that they really need to understand that the world has changed. The answer is not in trying to retrofit the same situation, and they need to move on. And David, if you go to the next slide, I think the biggest other challenge is that reducing investment in people programs. I just think it's so short-sighted. I had a conversation with someone that actually I worked with, CEO of a great company. In fact, probably to a fault, we used to spend on employees at the pre-pandemic era. And in his new company, I asked him a simple question and I said, he was complaining. He says, no, I don't have any budget for tech platforms. And I'm like, okay, let me ask you. He says, well, we have 3 line items on our P&L. We have compensation, we have benefits, and then we have performance. And if you can fit into any of this, and I said, that's interesting. I said, what happened to the employee welfare / motivation / office expenses line? And he said, well, we did away with that because we couldn't find anything that's effective. Can you imagine the amount of money that companies spent on offices in the past? Like, and why was that? Because you wanted a place where people came in and were motivated to work and felt that sense of loyalty, excitement. Oh, my office is so great. You wanted to bring your friends to see your office. Like that was a sense of pride that used to exist, right? And people spent a lot of money on that. Plus office snacks, drinks in office. Like we spent so much money on alcohol. And yet today in this remote environment, people feel so comfortable to just assume that because people are remote, they can just do away with this. That is really short-sighted. It's shocking to me as a leader. I mean, I'm guilty. I will tell you that I'm extremely guilty that as a CFO in the early days, I probably thought, yay, I don't have to spend money. But even I was smart enough to think, no, some portion of my office spend will have to be on employee programs that are going to be a little bit different. But this is the biggest challenge. And I think this is where the leadership is failing employees and they're failing their HR teams. Because the ask that they're supposed to make all of this happen without giving them the support that's required is completely unfair to me. And so I think that was what I would say that is most wrong. And honestly, I think it's reflected in company performance.
I will say one piece that really just gives me goosebumps, Radhika, and I know a lot of people on here will agree, is just that call out that, it's not all on HR shoulders. And we'll definitely get to that more into this conversation, but really appreciate you saying that. So now that we talked about really what this new era is, what companies are doing wrong, Adria, I'd love to start with you, but how should companies get this right then?
Yeah, David. No, I couldn't agree more with what Radhika shared. And, as we think about what we've been doing wrong, let's now think about some strategies of what we're doing, what we can be doing to get it right. And I think that that really comes to company leaders rethinking how we're going to drive employee motivation in order to also drive our business results, right? We know that employees want to feel they belong no matter where they work. We know that they want to feel connected to the company mission, their teammates, and that we're struggling with this element of employees also feeling very disconnected and isolated, right? So for me, it really boils down to us kind of ditching our last century strategies and approach in order to unlock that full potential. And we'll get into more of what that means. But from what I'm seeing, it's the traditional ways of how we've looked at managing performance, right? Traditional performance management, traditional ways of maybe doing cake cutting in an office. We have to look at really recognizing our employees, our teams as being human. And I think that that really first and foremost starts with relationship building. So for me, as I think about it, it has to be this intentionality to transform both recognition and performance in the workplace and genuinely tying those two together. We can't see them as separate entities anymore. And to Radhika's point, there's a lot of pressure in today's era of work around budget cuts, not investing not only in things like birthdays, anniversaries, special milestones, employee kudos, but I think even manager trainings, career development, these are things that become sadly deprioritized in a time where there are heavy workloads and quote unquote other priorities. So by really focusing on making recognition and performance interchangeable and intertwined, I think will start us on the right path to getting that mindset right and really enabling our teams. At the end of the day, I think that the starting place, the building block for us has to be on relationships. Again, people really want to feel genuinely connected to the work that they're doing, right? They want to be recognized for their accomplishments. They also want to celebrate their humanness, things like birthdays, anniversaries. I recently introduced as part of like our program at Bonusly, recognizing weddings, new babies, really making it very inclusive so that we're not only celebrating the work, but we're celebrating the people behind the scenes, right? And making that very personal and special. And ultimately, it might sound simple, but employees really also crave, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just Gen Z. We really want to know in today's work era how we're performing in real time, right? When you essentially create organizational alignment, when you give timely feedback, when you empower your managers, your teams excel. And I think a story behind this, that might help is if, for example, you're somebody who maybe gets nervous with public presentation, right? And you do really well, right? You take the coaching, you get the feedback in real time, you prep, you really feel good and you excel. But then your team, your manager really weighs in and says, wow, amazing job, and gives you those pointers. You feel motivated, you feel recognized, and that also enables your performance to have those takeaways, right? Whether the positive, but also constructive areas of improvement to know how you can do better next time. And I always believe that aspects of feedback really start with performance and feedback being a gift, right? It's a real opportunity for someone to invest into care and to really help you excel and grow. The combination of the two are what really drive impact, right? This is what really helps companies achieve peak performance. And I believe that if we're looking at these aspects of recognition, performance hand in hand, if we're doing this naturally, and we'll talk a bit in the next few slides about aspects of traditional performance management versus performance enablement, this, I think, is a really exciting element that we can tap into today's needs of the workplace and our employees, but ultimately help people really feel motivated to want to bring their best, to feel connected to the mission, to rebuild that trust with their manager and teams, and to really feel valued as you continue to grow as an employee in your organization. With that being said, I'll take a moment to pause and would love, Radhika, if you have any additional thoughts that you'd like to add as well.
Yeah, I think Adri, you said it, but the biggest, I guess I've thought a lot about this because recognition and performance are so intertwined, because recognition is basically positive feedback and performance done right is constructive feedback if done in the moment. And both of them happening in the moment are so critical. But I was just thinking, I was reflecting on this, and I was wondering, why were HR teams structured so that the people who were responsible for performance, of course, as a company grows bigger, not in the HR team of a small company, but as you start to grow, why is performance always separated from recognition or employee welfare or anything that that motivates employees, right? Essentially, recognition is about motivation. And what I realized was that in the old days when we were all in offices, there was a lot of asynchronous communication, that visual cues that used to exist. At this point where that doesn't exist, that importance of creating that bonding and that sense of trust is very critical, because only on the foundation of trust can you give constructive feedback that will then land and actually make a difference. So that, I think, is really critical, and that is a change. So we need to start removing the silos between these two and start combining them into one place, so that you're not going to, there's one way that you do recognition, and then there's a completely different place that you try to go into performance. It just doesn't work, because they're so not linear, they're so cyclical and so immediate in small bursts that you can't actually make it happen that it's, okay, today I'm going to do recognition and 6 months later I'll do a performance review for you. It just feels like, it's just so counterintuitive that it doesn't make sense, right? So that's how I think about it. And I think, Adri, you covered absolutely everything else. As we are talking, I'm watching the chat, honestly, and I'm very fascinated by it. So please keep giving us feedback, whether it's making sense or not or what. So do keep giving your thoughts in, because believe me, I'm reading a lot of that. So it's very exciting for me.
Yes.
Yeah, I have 199 HR professionals on this call that I can get feedback from. So it's brilliant. Go ahead, David, back to you.
Yes, I love it. I just want to say, Adri, one thing that you mentioned that I think is just super important is just that humanness element. I think it is so crucial, especially as, you're making decisions, as it's, budget season for so many people, and especially on this topic of recognition and performance and how it really just enables performance. So I just wanted to call that out and say that it's great. But now I want to go back to Radhika. So we really talked about, this new era of work, really what is not going so well, what needs to be done. So what do we do? Like I mentioned, we're in the middle of budget season, mostly HR leaders on this call. Where do they start? What do they do?
A great question. And maybe we go to the next slide. And I'm loving this concept because in the chat, they're talking a lot about water cooler area and the importance. So what I'm realizing and what I'm hearing from the chat is that there is a need for connection. People do feel that need, and they're coming up with different ideas in order to enable that. Some people are talking about the fact that they have these team building events, or they have break bread together. All of these are such important things. Let me bring you back to the fact that whatever you're doing, ultimately what we're trying to do is focus back on the key relationships. And that's where companies who want to start getting this right is really creating that focus and making sure that you're talking about these. In my mind, company outcomes are driven by a highly engaged and a high performing team. That's it. It's people driven. So one of the things that's fascinating to me is many times, leaders will ask, and CFO, again, I'm guilty at some point of having asked this question, what is the ROI on this? But the more I've thought about this, what's obvious to me is that the ROI of people programs is actually the company outcomes. Because it is impossible to drive revenue or profitability or whatever it is unless you have a highly engaged workforce. It's simply not going to happen. If your company is not performing, yes, you should look at the product and other things, but first look at your people. Do your people know what you need them to do? Are you communicating correctly? Are you using an ongoing form of letting them and enabling them to understand what you need from them? Are you keeping them motivated? Are they excited? Do they believe in your mission? Is your mission being communicated? Are you sure that you're communicating the values that you care about? That's what brings people together. Then the next question becomes, okay, but how are these people actually interacting with each other? Do they have a way to know who else works in the company? What is the common language that the company speaks? How do I ask my colleagues and coworkers? Because here's the second truth. When you work in teams, that's how work happens. It's the power of teams. And power of teams is based on collaboration. So you do need to have a way to get to know each other in the work context as well as out of work context, right? And then the final and most probably, well, I can't say it's the most important because that's really not fair because the other two are the foundational relationships in my mind. So manager and the team. The manager ultimately is the person, each employee's manager is the person who ensures that. But hey, you know how much pressure we are putting on managers right now? Because suddenly with the people budgets being much lower, all these other ways of trying to make things work, there is no organic asynchronous communication. It's falling on HR to organize these team events and other things, or the managers. The managers are, how can you, in the amount of direct reports that you have enough conversations in which you're able to build up the foundational trust, make sure that your employee knows whom else they're working with. How do you have visibility into what they're doing once you're not in the meeting and what's happening other than the work results that you focus on? Like managers are not being set up for success. And I think the leadership needs to refocus on each element of this and really try to figure it out. So here, I mean, these are some of the ways in which you can do this. I won't spend too much time here, but really the company and employees, personal events. I mean, we are human beings. We care about our personal events and we care that you know about our personal events. Award of performance. I mean, I want to know, it's not the award that's important as much as knowledge that what I'm doing is actually impacting the company in some way. Because I take pride in my work. I want to know that I'm having an impact. I don't want to be in my silo, whether I'm working in an office or whether I'm working at home. And then incentives for important contributions. I mean, if I'm going to, like, everyone likes to feel a little bit of motivation. It's always fun, right? Then for employees, I mean, you need alignment through continuous communication. You need teamwork through collaboration. Like, these are the things, and we already talked about the managers. These are really important outcomes that you want to think about. And then if we go to the next slide, David, I think here I want to talk about the fact that every company is somewhere in this life cycle. So if you really break it down, first and foremost, you need a strong mission and a vision and values because your people need to connect to that mission. So it's really important that that be properly defined. You have a vision that you're going to work towards, and the values of the company are really clear because that forms the foundation. That's what creates the first sense of, yes, I identify with this and I want to be part of this and I want to move this forward, right? So this is really critical. The next part of it is company and employees. Now, I think each of you just has to reflect. This is a very personal exercise to each company, quite honestly, because you may be at various levels of maturity within each of these pillars. So that cultural journey that one person that a company is on is a very personal one. But for HR, even though they're tasked with it, it needs to be in alignment with leadership. I think that's really important. So it needs to come together in that form. And what you have to do is just reflect on each of these components. That's why we've broken this down. We call it the cultural journey map. And you can kind of understand where are you, like employees, are you mobilizing the behaviors that matter? Is there a way that there is a good communication happening between leadership and employees, or between employees and each other, or managers and employees, which is kind of allowing people to understand what are the behaviors that matter to the business? What are the values that they care about, right? Is it a habit that you're recognizing people so that they know when they've done something right? And similarly for the manager employee, I think feedback, constructive feedback is an important component Because if for a second you were to just stop and say, what drives high performance, which is your final figure, like final pillar, right? What drives high performance? Just imagine that when we do the review cycle and look back and we say, oh, why you did badly this year? You did not do well. You are in not did not meet expectations. Who is that a reflection on? If you knew I was not meeting expectations, why didn't you help me along the way to meet expectations? That is the biggest conundrum to me. I don't understand it. Because if you're effective, if your company is effective in performance management along the way, the ideal conversation that's happening between a manager and employee is to know, hey, if you're doing this, it's not going quite well. I suggest you do these 3 other things, and you will be able to drive an outcome that actually is the right outcome. If that space is available and you have the trust to have that constructive feedback conversation, you can actually have everyone be a high performer. And then the only people who will not be high performers will be those who maybe culturally don't fit. Maybe they don't like your mission. Maybe they don't want to be here. They want to be somewhere else. Maybe they like a 9 to 5 job and a startup is not for them because it requires a lot of time and energy that needs to go into it, right? Those are perfectly fine things. Then you can have that conversation and actually move. In fact, our lowest level of performance is let's discuss. And our next level is high performance. If you're not at high performance, because we take ownership of the fact that we should be able to keep your high performance. If you're not, let's discuss why not. This is what we need to do. We need to change the paradigm of performance to be in the moment and on the foundation of recognition. If we can combine these things together, we can have a very powerful outcome where the company outcomes will happen and high performance will be inevitable. Adrienne, I'll hand over to you to talk about the manager side of it.
Yep. And I think just before that, one thing I really wanted to iterate on are some of these statistics from Gallup, Fortune, et cetera, really speaking to performance management today, where 98% of CHROs don't believe performance management is actually working. And, one of my favorite quotes I read recently is that per Gallup, if performance cycles were a drug, they would not meet FDA approval for efficacy today. I think that it really goes off of what Radhika and I have been talking about in terms of first recognizing this inseparable, really important link between performance and recognition in today's era of work, and then how we really look to bring that into today's paradigm. So David, if we go to the next slide for just a moment. Looking on the left, we see this aspect of traditional performance management from the beginning. I think that we spoke, each of us, about this element of moving away from traditional elements of how we've solved problems in the past. I think that as we look at today's world of work, we have to acknowledge that the traditional ways that we've been doing things are outdated. I would say as an HR leader myself that performance cycles, in the sense of doing these once a year, twice a year, have not been effective. It's also not meeting the needs of today's workplace, right? Be it Gen Z and other generations. Radhika spoke beautifully about this aspect of real-time feedback, this need for employees to feel connected, to feel motivated, and to know that the work that they're doing actually has meaning, is driving impact, right? Is contributing towards our company goals and really making a difference. When we think about, this aspect of performance management, some things that come to mind to me are very process driven. A story for us actually recently, and Radhika and I both work for Bonusly, which is in the HR tech space. So we are constantly working with employees, fellow leaders, and peers on our team, trying to solve these big problems, whether it's product, CS, within HR. And, the bottom line is we just did a performance review cycle. And while we put a lot of thought and care into the questions, right, and looking to make this more progressive, there's still a big sense from employees of performance reviews being anxiety inducing, being very process driven, being very very much that you have to really think from scratch. What did I reflect on? What am I talking about? Like what happened over the past 6 months? And I think the key to that, as we think about this performance paradigm, this shift, is as we focus on performance enablement, this becomes a practice, not a process. This becomes a ritual in our day-to-day. It's really important that we embed this into our one-on-one conversations, that performance is something we're talking about all the time, leaning into that aspect of relationship building and trust, right? But that we are having not only data-driven conversations, but we're growth-focused, right? We're looking at opportunities to build a culture of open feedback so that not only is performance something that's quote unquote top down, but bottom up, where employees also have an active seat at the table when it comes to owning their career development and making that possible in our organizations today. The aspects of 360s are also huge. To me, it shouldn't just be feedback that's one-sided from your manager, but as Radhika said, getting inputs cross-functionally in terms of, once you leave a meeting, you think about your bigger goals, but what are all those small pockets of recognition, feedback, the great work that's going on behind the scenes that are invisible, maybe even more so in today's hybrid remote era, right? So I think that looking at performance enablement as being a positive shift in the paradigm, really thinking about this as being lightweight, and genuinely focusing on if we could have those one-on-one conversations in the moment, if we can think about this as a process versus a practice versus a process, and we could really look to make this a conversation that's ongoing, then we just really look at this being a recap and there's no surprises, right? I've never had in any company that I've worked at one employee come to me and say, Adri, I am so excited to complete my performance review. And I really want to challenge myself and other HR leaders out there to be open-minded to thinking about new ways that we could be doing this better, right? Being more in touch with today's workplace, being more in touch with employees' needs, making the process more human is really going to help us level up, as well as, again, remembering that the direct linkage between recognition and performance is going to be critical to us driving that impact, but also making that journey very special and very meaningful for our employees and people managers. And then with that being said, David, I think we have a slide on one-on-ones. Yep. I think that here in terms of one-on-ones, this is feedback I've gotten in almost every company I've worked in. And, we can set the best programs out there in HR. And I think it's really important for us as HR leaders to work with our business leaders, to work with our people managers, because ultimately these are programs that while they're owned by people ops, it's not as though like some magic just happens on the people team side, right? Like there's a lot of motivation, there's a lot of opportunity for us to build great programs, but we need that partnership. We need to know that as we build one-on-ones, each of us takes that responsibility seriously. Each of us commits to that, right? So things like missing one-on-ones, not having active agendas, right? Not giving feedback. These are things that we need to coach, we need to invest in. We need to make sure, as we spoke about earlier, that while we're balancing budget season, and prioritizing, not only investing in people ops in these programs, but HR being a true partner and really leaning into our people managers, whether through training, day-to-day coaching, really enabling and making sure that these are driving the business outcomes, and asking for feedback from employees is going to be huge in terms of how we really get this right. And to me, again, it goes back to the ongoing conversation. It goes back to collaboration. It puts not only growth and development, but professional development at the forefront, right? And it really enables us to be true partners to the business as we coach, as we educate, as we guide, and as we make sure that, David said it beautifully before, it's not all in the hands of people ops. This is an incredible opportunity, learning from this paradigm and thinking about the future to build this together. But I'll take a moment to pause there, Radhika, and turn over to you and David for any added thoughts.
Nope, I think when I look at, everything that you said is perfect. And I'm also watching the chat. And I think, there's a lot of commentary there about managers really needing to be much better at giving feedback, and they should have a performance review on whether they're giving good feedback or not. I think I love that. The challenge, though, I feel for the managers is that while we can require that of them, there are two things which have become very, very difficult. The foundation of constructive feedback has to be recognition. And that's a lot of pressure on a manager, especially because they're not able to have the visual cues of how their employees are doing. And if we find, and so they need tools, and I know that the next section will talk about technology as an enabler of that. But in this particular slide, I think it's really important. If you actually do performance along the way, then the performance review should be recaps of what's already been done with no surprises. Like that is the ultimate test of whether a manager has done a good job along the way or not. Um, David, we can move to the next section. I want to be mindful of time and allow a little bit of space for
Yeah,
Q&A.
absolutely. Yeah, this actually is a question that is in the Q&A already too, so this is perfect. But we'll pass it back to you, Radhika. But where and how does technology come into play for all of this?
Yeah, I think, I think that one of the things that's happened and that we cannot ignore is that the void that has been created by the lack of office space, like the place where we go to interact with each other in an asynchronous manner, in an organic manner. Because it's not possible. Yeah, I mean, there are many things that HR does, like they'll organize programs, they'll organize coffee chats, they'll organize all of this, but the action of being able to go and do that still feels a little bit unnatural because you're going and still you're doing a structured activity together, right? You may allow for chit chat, but it doesn't always work. Not everyone is comfortable speaking up in a smaller. They always will deprioritize that and go do another meeting that's for work. So that's the inevitable problems that we run into. And you still don't have a way to actually track what people are doing, whether they're engaged or not. So I think this is where technology comes in. And recognition platforms to me, which before in one era were a nice to have, they were a place that people probably were just one more way that people could engage or employers could do something for their employees. It democratized, of course, recognition in the hands of the people, which was a very powerful thing. But in today's world, I see it as a window. And I will tell you that me as an employee, I'll give you my own story. When I joined Bonusly, now I'm a past customer of Bonusly as well, in the pre-pandemic era. And then the pandemic hit and we realized what this could potentially do for us as a tool. But really coming into Bonusly and joining a company for the first time, and actually in the company that I was prior to that, we were acquired and had to do away with Bonusly, and it was an M&A situation. And it did not exist, this platform. We did not have a place. We had the formal teams and all of that, but we did not have this, and actually we implemented it there because it was so useful. But what Bonusly does is it gives me a window. And I'm talking about Bonusly, sorry, because that's the platform that we use. There are other recognition platforms too. But when you think of it as a window where people are recognizing each other for something that they have done as they work together, and the story that gets told along with that recognition is shared, that is super powerful. Like that is, and maybe David, we can go forward so that we can talk about it in the context. Like, look at this, right? If you look at this, Kian in this case, who wants to give a sorry, my boss is calling me. That's not good. If you think about the story that she's saying now, if I'm in I suddenly know who Kian is. Oh, okay, Kian is giving Emmy a shout out for what? Oh, there's a project going on. This is what the project does. Now I have a visibility into the platform and into what's happening, right? If you're Devi and you're getting a happy birthday message, now other people are adding on to it. Now suddenly you're part of this whole spectrum of knowing who works in the company. When I joined the company new, and I was looking at my feed because this is what I do. I always go to the feed to understand what's going on in the business. It's a great way for me to tell what people are working on and how are they working. And this is, as a leader, invaluable information to me. And I was seeing that one of the people on my team was getting recognized again and again. And I said, wow, I have a high performer on the team. That's excellent. Then I dug in a little bit more and I said, oh, let me see who is actually giving that. And I started to see that the stories that were supporting that recognition were related to a customer support team recognizing her for solving a problem. And I said, oh, if finance is being recognized by support, there is just something that's going on which may not be good for our customers. And we were able to dig into that. We were able to fix the problem at the root. These kinds of insights don't occur without that common space. And I think that's what technology is going to enable for us to do. And in this new era of work, it's very, very critical to have that. And if you go forward a little bit, I want to talk about empowering managers. If your managers already have employees who are feeling motivated because the platform is recognizing them for the work that they do, managers can recognize in real time as the work is happening in an asynchronous manner. So they don't have to set up a meeting specifically during work hours, make sure that they're meeting, but rather are able to go and have this very impactful, hey, great job, you did XYZ. that is pretty amazing too, right? So it starts to create this culture of very positive interaction that the managers can then build off. And you can actually have a space where we are solving the manager's problem of actually having insights by providing them a space where all of this is captured together in one place. So that each time they meet with their direct report, it already starts with the foundation of positive recognition. And when it does that, then you can have the one-on-one in a meaningful manner, and you can actually capture the thoughts along the way of which how the goals are, what's working, how can we do better. And then from a leadership standpoint or from a manager standpoint, to amplify the behaviors and values that matter. Like you can really go out and say, hey, I could probably, let's say Adri did a brilliant job and she did very well in the performance review cycle that she just ran. And supposing I go and speak to her about that, and I can just tell her that. And she was very innovative in something. But then I've had a private conversation with her. If I were to put that on a feed and say, Adri, you did this and you did this really well, and these are the reasons why. Now other people know whether they're excited. What matters to me as a leader and how they should behave that will impact the company outcomes. So it's this ongoing sense of communication. It's the ongoing sense of camaraderie. It's knowing who else works. It's understanding the language. It's enabling your managers, and it's really having a space for people to feel really good. This is okay and simplifying HR's life, quite honestly, because I think HR is the one. I mean, I would say managers are really burdened by this, and I think HR is the other team that's definitely burdened by this. I just want to look at I think there's some interesting questions in the chat that were there. I think recognition space, working separately, we can answer them as Q&A. I think there's some interesting questions that people are actually asking. But let's quickly finish the last part, which is, I think let's just take a couple of minutes because there's some good questions. So I want to make sure that we get to those.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if we just want to keep with, actually, we'll go to Adri first about HR, but let's just talk really about how can HR enable this transformation with this new way of thinking?
Yeah, absolutely, David. And I think I alluded to this earlier, but if we jump to the next slide, I have a couple of highlights as I think about methodology and some things that might help anchor as we're talking live today. I think the first bit for me is really recognizing the partnership with leaders and people managers, right? We need to have that voice and seat at the state table. We need to make sure that there are investments in people programs like this, being both recognizing the humanness of our employees at work, as well as the recognition for the great work that's being done and celebrated across the company. As I think about partnering with leaders, I really look as an HR business partner to ask what's keeping them up at night? What are the problems that we're looking to solve, right? And this includes not only talent, things like performance management, succession planning, but what are the things that are happening in their world today so that I can really be a true partner and lean into that and be a part of the solution. The next bit is looking at employees' impact and company outcomes. So I really want to make sure that as an HR leader, I'm focused on not only building the programs, but looking at the motivational techniques that are really going to help our employees feel connected, engaged, motivated, belonging, right? And to enable them to really perform at their best. I think the first two, as I partner with leaders, I also want a close sense of having eyes and ears on the ground to build those relationships with employees myself, to ask proactively for that feedback, even though we know like at all levels, feedback can be daunting, but it doesn't have to be. I think if we set the right culture and tone, employees also want to recognize that they're a part of the culture and building this together, right? So really looking at how employees are impacting those company outcomes and what can we do to move the needle and make that even stronger. Finding solutions that are new and solve underlying issues. Again, we've talked about the outdating ways of doing things, right? Whether it's traditional performance management or other solutions, I believe that really looking at new modern approaches, leveraging technology, as well as finding ways to help employees just understand real-time feedback, aspects that will help them improve, aspects that will really help cultures grow and flourish are going to be really important here. And being open, even though there are ways as a traditional HR leader too, have been in the industry for over 10 years, There are things that I lean into in my toolbox, and I'm not saying just throw that all out the window, but I think we need to be open and embracing this new era of work. And as we've talked about, really linking again recognition and performance, aligning budget. We need to make sure, as I mentioned, that we have a focus on people teams having budget, having the resources at our fingertips to really enable great cultures and programs. And then, of course, using language that's business centric, right? Radhika made me laugh earlier where she spoke about, earlier, oh, back in the day, I might think I saved some dollars, but if you really think about it, and it's important to recognize the impact that we have building our cultures, our people together, is really important. And to recognize that the traditional way of maybe celebrating birthdays in the office, getting to know the language, the culture, the values, all of this has changed over the past few years, and it's something that we're still getting used to. So HR leaders, HR business partners being that right arm to the business, being able to translate our financial goals, being more educated around the financials, right? But also how that's moving the needle in terms of what's keeping our leaders up at night, how employees are driving impact is going to be huge. And then lastly, putting that all together and implementing solutions in partnership together. As I mentioned earlier, I don't believe that these programs are single-handedly on HR's shoulders, as David so eloquently put it. I really see us as being a true partner to really enable the outcomes, to understand what's happening in the business, but overall to work with our people managers and employee on the ground to get our culture and our programs right together.
Absolutely. And I do think next time we need to make the webinar an hour and a half because we always run up so close on time. But with that, I will pass it to Tori because I know we have a couple of really good questions in the Q&A that I think we have some time to get to.
Absolutely. And thank you all for such a valuable discussion today. And with that, I'm going to dive straight into the questions. As a reminder, if we don't get to your question today, you can connect with our panelists via the chat, the social channels on the screen, and they're also in the chat. Okay, so our first question comes from Kat. How do you reconcile this recognition space still operating separately from workspace? In office, is these would be this, or would this be the same? Or, how can tech really fill the gap in a remote or hybrid world?
I'm going to take this one, Adri, just because I'm so super passionate about it, because I do think that this is the solution. So I think the beauty of it is that you have to make it part of your workspace. So I don't think recognition should be happening separately, and it's about encouraging behaviors that will drive that. And for us at Bonusly, the way that we think about it is that when you're combining the recognition and the performance together, understanding that people ultimately are coming together for a business purpose, that recognition that's being given because it's work related, it starts to come together, and we actually integrate with Slack and Teams and other other workspace tools which people work naturally and use naturally in their course of work, which makes it a part of it. And I think the other part is that when we look at the manager piece of it, and you start to think of the one-on-ones occurring through this, because it provides this platform where managers are giving positive recognition or constructive feedback along the way, asynchronously even, because sometimes you can do notes and other things together. You can also keep it private. What it does is it actually becomes a natural extension of the workspace itself. And you'd be surprised if the stories are done right. And we actually are very careful about how this system is implemented, because it's about education and teaching leadership and managers to use the system to really encourage those stories to come out. That's when it really becomes a part of where that asynchronous communication that used to happen in offices, because you're walking down somewhere, you overhear a conversation, you talk. Think of this as your official permission to eavesdrop across the company on what's going on. And it's a really super powerful tool. So I did see one more question that I want to just address is someone asked about whether there is a bad feeling that occurs because someone gets more recognition than another one. It can happen, but I think, again, the way to handle this is to recognize that there are some positions which are always going to be less in the limelight. And that's where managers and leaders can play a very big role in making sure that those positions also get the limelight of what's going on. And that sharing culture that you build actually is what drives people to feel good about it regardless.
Thank you. And I want to quickly close out with a question from Yeji. When executive leadership is going through a major change where the company's mission, vision, and value are left sort of vague, what guidance can we give to individual managers to help employees stay engaged in moving forward?
That's a great question. Adri, do you want to take it? Do you want me to take it?
Maybe start, Radhika. I'd like love to hear what
Sure.
you
Yeah, sure. So I think that if there is a change and I think first is that you hold on to the basic trust value, basic values that are human values, which are about trust, communication, common sense. Like these are the ones that matter, which are universal, right? So giving them a safe set of things to latch onto, which may not be specific to a business, but are truly what exist in every single company, would be a great way to ground people, because I do think that there is a need to, in moments of change, especially the grounding function is very critical, and HR plays a really big role on that. And so really go back to your human values and lean in on those. And human values are usually trust first and always, speaking the truth and doing it with compassion. These are the ones that kind of resonate, and I think those are the ones that you go back to in such times, and it will help you bring the company, bring the employees through the change. We've been through it, we've done that multiple times, and we found that this always works. So just go back to your human values.
Thank you. And it looks like that is all the time we have for today. I hope you all learned half as much as I did. If we didn't get to your question, you can connect with our panelists using the channels on the screen, and they're also in the chat. Just a few reminders before you go. The Sherman HRCI activity IDs will be sent out within the next 48 hours to those that stayed for at least 50 minutes of this live webinar. Activity IDs cannot be provided to those who view the recording. Lastly, we'd like to encourage you to participate in the survey that will pop up in your browser after the webinar. This feedback helps us to continue to produce webinars that you all enjoy. Thank you to our sponsor, Bonusly, and a big special thank you to our 3 phenomenal panelists for providing us with such an amazing discussion today. And a huge thank you to you all for attending. I'm Tori, and I hope you have a productive rest of your day.
Thank you.